A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. That point this week would be the entirety of Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson.
Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
Book clubs usually meet in the evening, Crossland.
This is a weekend, so you can have an afternoon book club if it's the weekend.
It's not afternoon.
You're right, it's fucking the morning.
It is 9 a.m.
For you, yeah, at the very least it's 10 for me, so it feels a little bit better. So, with that, today is our final episode discussing Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. We are going to chat about chapters 37 through the end. But before we do that, PJ, what are we drinking on this fine morning?
So, I threw together an elderflower sour.
Ooh. What are you calling it?
I don't know. Elder sour? No, I don't have a name for it. Because I don't think it's that good. So I don't want to name it. It's fine. It's okay. It's not anything that I might refine it and try to change it a little bit and make it better, but I don't think I'd approach this specific recipe again. It is 3 ounces of pinhook bourbon, an ounce of elderflower liqueur, 1.5 ounces of lemon juice, and like 3/4 ounce of simple syrup, all shaken and served with a lemon peel. It's fine. I don't know what I think of it. Maybe it's just because it's morning, but it's a little bit too sweet. The elderflower comes through a little bit too strong, and the bourbon isn't strong enough to like cut through it all. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a problem with proportions.
That felt like a lot of bourbon.
Yeah, I initially started it with 2 ounces, and then my lemon was too big, so I decided to scale up the recipe a little bit and went with 3. So it's thrown together, and I didn't really have a basis for like how I built it. So
Sure.
Yep, that's where that came from.
What are you following that up with?
Following that up, I've got Synaptic Cleft from Drecker Brewing Company. It is a double IPA featuring Moteur, Citra, and Belma hops. 3 of those I am not familiar with.
I've never heard of Belma hops.
Neither have I. They use their house IPA yeast, Pale Two-Row, oats, wheat, and carafoam for their malt bill. I love how Drecker explicitly calls out their ingredients in all of this. Like, it's something I wish more breweries did, because it takes up a tiny like postage stamp size corner of their label, and it's so much street cred for all the beer nerds that are looking for their stuff. Like, I know for a fact that I avoid Amarillo hops like the plague, and it's nothing against the quality of the beer itself. I just don't like that hop varietal for the most part. I know you've had a couple examples where like it.
I'm gonna shock you with some Amarillo whenever you visit, but
I'm excited. I'm really excited to be like shaken up by that opinion. But like, I appreciate when the hop bill is put on the label, which a lot of breweries do, especially for New England IPAs. But just getting into the more of the nitty gritty is just so satisfying for me to see exactly what it's made of. So it's good. I wish it wasn't morning, so I could really analyze it a little bit better. I'm still like waiting for my palate to wake up a little bit, I feel like. So
kicked mine awake with some coffee, of which I'm still drinking. So I feel you.
But what are you drinking?
I am having a cocktail that I am affectionately naming, or maybe not so affectionately naming, Rashek's Blood, which is really, it's a spin on a whiskey sour. I've been into working around egg whites and like trying to figure out how to best incorporate it into other things. But this is just kind of a classic, morning I was thinking about it. I wanted berries. I had fresh berries. So what it is it's 2 ounces of rye, 1 ounce lemon juice, in egg white, 3/4 ounce simple syrup, mashed blackberries. I put 3 blackberries and 3 raspberries inside of it, and topped with Angostura bitters after you do a dry shake, and then I do a cold shake. So dry shake for a little bit, throw in ice, do the cold shake, pour it in, and then topped with Angostura bitters. I think the most important part of this drink, though, is to make sure that whatever you're garnishing with, you're doing a lemon wedge, the berry combo, of which you already have extras, fucking do it, and you're spiking that with a metal cocktail rod. I think that's really important to get that metal spike in there for a little bit of Inquisitor action on top of the drink. But I really like it. I think it's really solid. It's just a spin on a whiskey sour with a little bit more lemon juice than you would typically add, and a little bit more rye. I normally prefer my whiskey sours with bourbon. Switching it up to rye is interesting. It's different, and I like the herbal notes that come through with the fruit a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the other part of that is that I do, after taking photos, immediately dip the lemon in, and then you start to get this really great, like, because the lemon is soaking in it, you get a more pervasive but not overly bitter lemon element to it, which I really like. So
awesome.
Feels like we're dipping into multiple powers here, as I'm sitting here sipping this drink. They're compounding. I am following that up with, again, I think it was an episode or 2 ago, Flying Machines Roswell 1954. Same vanilla porter. I figured breakfast stout, breakfast porter. If I'm going to follow something up, I was just going to do that because I was like, what the fuck am I drinking this morning? So I was between all of this and there were a couple of other options with ginger beer and whatnot, but I decided on this. So yeah, straightforward, perfect. Tasty. Go Flying Machine. Went there the other day, bought a really crazy beer, but I didn't want to drink it on the show this morning. I will probably drink it next week with Lindsay. So perfect. On the show. That'll be the plan. All right. Normally, folks, we would move into last week's predictions here. However, we are maybe making a change. We're going to see how it feels this week, but we are going to move predictions to the end of the episode after we discuss the content, so then we can pay off predictions based on the content as it's happened and exposed.
Makes sense.
I think so. I think that this makes more sense because then we aren't kind of awkwardly dancing around things that we want to talk about.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Good point.
Yeah. So I think that this will let us kind of talk about it and then be like, yeah, when we get to the end, it's clear that that happened. So cool. With that, let's move into chapter 37. We're only talking about 3 chapters this week, and they're short ones. So there's a lot that happens, of course. We open up this week with Dockson's perspective. I think this is really unique here to jump in and communicates really important information to the reader, of course. The rebellion is going swimmingly. Luthadel is falling, of course, to the torches and the ska as they're parading through. We're also introduced to Goradel, of whom is one of the soldiers that was turned away by Vin instead of being killed, like they might have by Kelsier, and lending help to the ska cause, which is fantastic to see that kind of thematic payoff to Vin's motives. But of course, Dockson is also presented with a nobleman prisoner, that of Elend Venture.
Throughout the entire book, I don't think I properly appreciated Dockson. He felt like a half-baked side character for the most part, and I think that's just on me. I just didn't read into him enough. So it's going to be interesting to go back and reread the entire story, because I think this section from his perspective opened that up and made me realize how important of a character he really is. So
he's truly the right hand. I mean, in a big way. And I didn't get so much half-baked. I know that you're just kind of throwing out words here.
Yeah,
I don't think that you believe that. Yeah, you're fine. But I do totally understand what you're talking about with you don't quite pay enough attention to him, and then we hop into his perspective, and all of a sudden it's like, dude is the right hand. He has been the whole time. Why have I not been focusing on that? I think part of that is because we just didn't focus on him. We were talking about Kelsier, and we talked about the members of the crew of whom were Mistings and not Dockson ever. Mm-hmm. The only non-Misting crew member.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So
he's just a thief.
Just a thief. Just an ex-plantation ska thief, right? Yeah.
Yeah. We did get into him, I think, in like episode 7 or 8.
I
when
think
we're
you're right.
confronted with a little bit of his past. Actually, we talked a lot about that, and we cut it down for the episode. We talked almost 2 hours about that that particular interaction. But it wasn't so much a focus on Dachshund, it was a focus on morals.
Yeah. As far as Elend goes, I don't know. It felt less like a prisoner and more like a mutually beneficial meeting. You know, like it never seemed like he was treated like a prisoner, even in the context of like he was being apprehended and brought to Dachshund.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. As I think about Elend in this moment, which is basically not where we ended last week, but where we ended Elend's perspective last week, with him basically resolving to turn himself in. So this is just an extension of that and kind of the payoff for that. It's not a whole lot else. I mean, thematically or otherwise, it's really a plot beat, and it's good to see that the Scott react positively to this idea, and you know that he is influential and that he's showing those signs of leadership as later he is made king.
Yeah.
But also within the scene, there's also Ham and his. I think that the little bit about Pewter and how he abuses weapons and how a pewter arm might abuse weapons is kind of an interesting side note on top of this whole thing being, you know, if you've got this incredibly strong person who can swing something harder, of course they're going to break the sword. Like, most people know exactly how, like, certain things interact. If you think about a movie like The Last Duel, right? Like, they know what their weapons are going to do against armor or whatever, and they know that it's going to bounce off or the immediate impact. But if you leveled up your strength 10 times, you're going to go through swords like nobody's business, because all of a sudden your lever is so much stronger and the metal can't hold up to it.
I mean, I get it, but why not then just get a fucking warhammer?
That's a great question. Ham should have a hammer, I think.
Yeah. Or a like a really beefy battle axe or something.
I imagine, now that I'm thinking about it, Ham having a hammer is probably why he didn't go with that, because it would be such a meme alliteration.
Yeah, but it makes sense, doesn't it? You're not going to go through it. Mm-hmm. And you're going to really, like, swords, while swords can, like, benefit from strength, more often than not, they're finesse weapons. He does, like, his power is strength, not finesse. Yeah,
unless you're truly like two-handing it, like a two-handed heavy sword. But even then, it's still a finesse weapon versus like a battle axe or a hammer or even like a staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, just a fucking metal bar.
Give Ham unforged metal. Just let him beat people with it.
Like something that most people couldn't actually lift. Just,
yeah. That gets into the interesting nuance of pewter arms, though, because as Ham had said, part of being a pewter arm is knowing when to like activate it, when to deactivate it, versus just having it run all the time, right? So like you would lift up something like a hammer, and then once you get it to the apex where it's starting to come down and get that velocity, you'd probably turn off your pewter and just let the hammer follow through, because you've already created the upward to go down. Or would you also? You could follow through. It just depends on.
I mean, the strength in a battle hammer is accelerating through the fall. Like as long as you like, if it's all the same, as long as you can lift it, it's the same power coming down. Like no, the power is acceleration.
That's fair. I'm going to cross the streams a little bit here, just for a brief interlude. Can you imagine if Thraxa was a pewter arm?
Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be wild and so violent and so cool.
Yeah.
And in her own way, I guess she is, because she's a gold. So there's that, but not entirely the same. Anyway, I think that that's an interesting sidetrack to just be like, of course, pewter arms go through weapons quicker than anyone else does, because
but that was my entire thought process. Yeah, that was my entire thought process during that scene, was like, why are you using something that can get worn out like that?
Like, why aren't you,
get a hammer.
Get yourself a fucking hammer. It's not like you had plenty of time. Renew had plenty of time to get you whatever you wanted. You had a year. It's fine. We cut back from there, of course, from Dachshund's perspective to Vin, and get a really critical piece of information here from Carr about Reen, Carr the Inquisitor, about Reen, and how in the end, even while under extreme torture from the Inquisition, he didn't sell out Vin and lied to protect her.
Yeah, that was a really great reveal.
Yeah.
It does bring into question, again, I think we talked about this earlier, the motivations behind Reen and why he beat and abused Vin the way he did. Like, was this obstinance from giving up Vin entirely separate from that abuse, or was it tied into this weird, twisted, way over the top, like, reasoning for, like, tough love almost, kind of keeping her safe through forcing her to be independent?
I believe you're entirely correct with that. I think that is the right way to read this, is that it is a combination. I mean, I think what you're referencing when we talked about it earlier is in earlier episodes, we'd kind of been discussing Reen over time. And I think that this adds that final, it's kind of a nail in the coffin where it says that Reen was a child parenting a kid as best as he could as an barely older brother to try to take care of her in a brutal world, and did a fucking bad job for the most part.
I guess at that point, were they full siblings? Like
half siblings.
They were half siblings. Okay.
Yep. Vin's sister was a full sibling.
Okay. That gives even more interesting implications later. I have suspicions of Vin's mother, and I'm curious if Reen has some ferrochemical powers and knows of Vin's, like, he obviously knows of Vin's father. Does he know that Vin is a Mistborn ahead of time, or has the potential to become a misting of some sort ahead of time? I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the fun circles of the story, is some of the historical speculation that can happen here, especially in Vin's history in this first book.
We still don't know Vin's snapping point, do we?
No, we do not know when Vin snapped.
Did she ever mention... I feel like I've asked this before. Did she ever mention using luck with Reen?
I think we specifically tried to address that question in a previous episode, and I do not believe that it was ever exposed that she used luck with Reen.
Okay. Yeah, I think that rings a bell. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want more. Man.
Well, the good news is we've got 2 more books.
We've got 6 more books?
Well, yeah. Yep. We've got
2 more books in this arc.
Correct. Yeah. And then we've got 2 short stories, and, well, we've got 1 short story for this arc, and then we've got 1 short story for the next arc. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we've got
the era.
Era arc. It's the same, really, if you think about it that way. That's how Sanderson himself has defined it. So it's going to be, I'm glad that you've got this interesting read on Reen, right? And this sort of brother-sister relationship, because I think it is really important to the base of the story. Yeah. Sazed, of course, is abducted, beaten to hell, stripped naked, stripped of all of his external metal mines, captured by the Inquisitors as well, and thrown into the same cell as Vin, tied his hands together with an iron, I think it's iron, I think they say it's iron, but with a ring clasping him together so that he wouldn't, in theory, be able to move, chained to the ground. And he uses his miraculous powers of ferochemy to bust them out, learning a trick from Vin ingesting his metal in order to store that strength power to break through and amplify that moment of weakness. This is so cool. Like, it's a cool moment.
Yeah, it is. I was kind of hoping swallowing the metal would be a Vin-centric reveal of something going forward. I don't know. I think it still is. I think it still is to a certain extent. But even, I alluded to it already, that I think Vin is also a ferochemist. And I think we're led to believe that a little bit towards the end of the book. But this is still a very satisfying reveal of, or a satisfying callback to something that happened. I don't know what else to say about that without kind of deep diving into Vin, which I'm I know we'll do later. So
we are definitely going to do that before the end of the episode. So
yeah. So I do have to say, though, this is something that I railed against a little bit in Red Rising when something like this happened. Why are 2 very plot-centric, important characters put into the same jail cell without any sort of over? Like, shit's gonna happen.
I want to talk a little bit about your meta read here. In Red Rising, I think it makes a lot of sense that that is an incorrect thing to do, because all of Earth's history, as we know it, exists inside of the Red Rising universe. Vague spoilers, I guess. And so, in the moment in which that happens, hundreds and thousands of movies have been created, of which people, like, this is a central plot point. This book, Mistborn, exists inside of the Red Rising universe, technically. So, like, they should fucking know better. Based on all of the potential media and like data points and everything else. Like, there's no, in Red Rising, I agree with you. Here, we've got no basis for understanding. Yeah. So I can at the very least forgive it more here in a fantasy setting in which, you know, we're recognizing it from our perspective of it being, you know, an error, but how often the Lord Ruler has done such a good job of keeping the Terracemen down, exterminating them, trying to remove the bloodlines as much as possible, and kill off feruchemists in general, that they don't know to even anticipate this. He's probably hiding that information from his Inquisitors to begin with, so they don't even...
Yeah, that's fair.
They don't have a read on it either.
The other thing that question brings up, feruchemists are... Or not feruchemists, Terracemen in general are eunuchs.
They're made eunuchs by the Lord Ruler.
Exactly.
Not all of them are.
Why are they not just purged?
We can get into this near to the end, but once we get the reveal that Rashek is the Lord Ruler, he refuses to kill his own people because he believes that they're the dominant people, right? Okay,
that's a very reasonable answer.
And that's why I think he also allows Terrace society to still exist, and breeds Terrace people, but ultimately neuters many of the men.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is a wild genetic eugenics experience to discuss. Ooh, man, dude. Lord Ruler do some nasty shit to his own people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. It's safe to say, I think, based on that similar assumption, and we'll talk more about this later, but that the Ska are probably Kaleniamites and the rest of the society of Scadrial. So they're likely, you know, the society that felt oppressive and the empire that felt oppressive to Rashek, and he basically flipped the script on them.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, isn't that an interesting side note? Like, there's so much that's revealed in the moment where Rashek is known to be the Lord Ruler. We'll talk a lot about that. So, of course, the feruchemical powers too are super cool, and seeing that on display physically, him deteriorating and then, you know, coming to life is interesting, because I think it also sets up what happens with the Lord Ruler a little bit later when he kind of deflates and inflates. So there's a moment here when they're escaping where Kelsier's final words echo in Vin's ears. You still have some things to learn about friendship, Vin. And she turns around and saves Sazed from his potential fate at the hands of the guards, the obligators, and also manages to just dispatch them confidently without her medals, jumping and leaping as though she were an Allomancer without the Allomantic abilities. And I really enjoy this moment of badassery from Vin, because I think it shows that she's refined herself as that thief in the beginning that we saw into an assassin, even without medals.
Yeah, badassery is, I think, an apt description of what's going on here. There's a quote in this section that I want to highlight. Mm-hmm. At least I tried. At least I didn't abandon him. And I think that is the perfect culmination of this journey that we've been on with Vin and her personal growth throughout the entire thing. We've talked a lot about growth, and I think that's something that's kind of strived for in really any story, is the growth of the characters that you're experiencing. But this was a very understandable, tangible, empathy evoking growth arc for Vin.
Yeah, entirely. I think another interesting point to like tag into this a little bit is that line in particular harkens back to her relationship with Ulef right at the beginning. The young boy that she was he's not really, you know, he's of a similar age, but the boy that she was a friend with in Cayman's crew. This is kind of that moment where it's her coming full circle on this idea of friendship, and I think that we do literally say, like, here is the beginning, here is the end. Look, Vin's changed in this kind of way here. And I think that's great. I think it's an important character moment.
Yeah. God, I haven't thought about Ulef basically at all since the beginning.
Yeah,
of the
since
book.
he died by the Inquisitor's hands. So
Yeah.
yeah. Did I just have to search his name because I forgot it? Abso-fucking-lutely I did. Because I remember mentioning it last episode and not saying it. So here I am pulling it out of my ass. Yeah, man. Fuck. Stabbing the dudes with the knife. It's so good. So good. Of course, we have to round out this chapter with kind of the final beat here. Elend shows up and needs saving once again as they're surrounded by troops. Vin dispatches these obligators, these members of the Steel Ministry, this time fueled by Allomancy as she recognizes her clothes among a bundle in the side, tearing into the opponents and tearing them apart. Kind of easy peasy. And even like makes this reference to Kelsier being like, oh yeah, this is kind of addicting as you kind of feel the push and pull. And she's clearly imitating his style in a big way here, as though she learned it from that moment of seeing that violence. But the more important part here is the moment that follows that, of course, the moment where Vin and Elend share their first, I want to say, real interaction between the two of them without the lies and the guises of personality. And it's just a wonderful moment here for our girl.
Yeah, our girl. Our girl.
I realize that we say our boy all the time, but Vin's our girl. So
absolutely. It's a nice, cute moment between them that comes out of this, but something that comes up quite a bit. And so this is something that's been brought up before from Doxson and like with Spook in the area, talking about modesty, I guess, and the fact that she's not wearing clothes for the most part. Like, she's in her undergarments throughout this entire scene. And it's weird how much focus there is on how uncomfortable that makes basically everybody in the series. And it's really odd. Like, I could see it from Elend being like this very properly brought up, noble, highborn guy. But it's reflected in the ska populace as well. And that modesty doesn't make sense to me in this context.
I think I have a reasonable reason why.
Okay.
Vin is a 16, almost 17-year-old.
Okay.
Given we're putting our parameters from our society on this society at that point. So I don't think that's necessarily completely fair of a read, but I do think that is at least a part of it. Well, however,
it's always in the context. That. It's in the context of distraction.
Yeah, that feels like a very teen boy response almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess.
Indecency.
I guess both people talking. It was Doxson though that brought it up.
Yeah. Right.
Not
previously. Yeah.
But I guess it was for Spook's sake, I guess. I think he references that. I think he talks about that. Elend is, like I said, he's proper brought up, highborn guy. So that makes sense to me. But it feels like it just feels like so much is put on this. And like it's explicitly referenced twice now. I can't help but think that that's intentional and will be something more than just that's just how it is going forward.
I think that that's meant to be intentional here because there's still, even if we think about the relationship and the relationship between Vin and Elend, they're still in the courtship phase. They're still kind of in that part of the relationship. So like that's in a very Christian centric way. I think that's considered what's appropriate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The fact that this was brought up made me more think about the last scene that it was brought up, which was after pewter dragging. Or no. After getting saved by Sazed.
Sazed, yeah.
Sazed. Wow, how did I fuck that
You
up?
could say Sazed. Some people do say it's Sazed. Some people say there's another one. There's another one in there that's really awful that I don't agree with.
But after being
said it that way, I've invited to be a guest on our show, so it's fine. We'll see how that goes. Anyway.
After he was brought in, she was like undergarment clad. Basically. And like that's what people focused on?
Yeah. I think that's like a standard thing. It's a individual standards. It does feel odd. I don't think we're getting to the romantic beat here.
No, we're not. But it just feels odd. It feels off. It feels weird. And
Well, I think it's because it feels improper to Elend, probably, because of the way that he's been raised and everything else. And he is, as we learn from kind of Straff's example, he is truly, I think, like a pinnacle nobleman in the way that they were probably not supposed to be. Something that they should aspire to be like. Because I think Straff is ultimately what the Lord Ruler wanted, because he's expecting turnover instead of these things. So I think Straff is more of the design of the Lord Ruler. But Elend has the sort of propriety to him, I should say. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of what we're experiencing here.
Yeah, that's fair.
But the emotionality of the moment is fantastic. It's Elend really, or not Elend, it's Vin really like breaking down and being like, this is what I want, this is what I wanted. I'm so glad that I have this right now. And being very honest. And we go from that breakup moment that we had forever ago to the scene where Kelsier dies and Elend is there trying to save her, even though she's not anywhere near where he is, and Kelsier actually ends up saving him, to here now, finally reunited.
Right. Yeah.
My heart. With that, we move into... Do you have anything else on this chapter? Any other thoughts?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that I dug into... I don't know.
I mean, it's not
female modesty a little bit too much, maybe.
That's fair. I don't think it was unreasonable, though, especially given the parameters of the universe we're talking about. Like, I think that's an interesting thing to tackle, especially given. So we go to chapter 38, starting on page 618. Such are my fears as I scribble with an ice-crusted pen on the eve before the world is reborn. Rashek watches, hating me. The cavern lies above, pulsing. My fingers quiver, not from the cold. Tomorrow, it will end. This is such a good final chapter, right, for the book, and we've read this previously. This feels... It has that sort of... Given the context that we get inside of this chapter, it's read entirely differently now that we're at the end, because Rashek watching is really him plotting to take what will eventually be the Well of Ascension from our guy who's been writing this logbook. We don't have his name yet.
Our boy.
Our boy, that guy. Our boy, the hero of ages.
Well,
maybe.
Cleniite?
Yeah. Cleniamite. But yeah, it's interesting because I think that I felt like I had to sneeze. This reads both as a wonderful final prologue to what's going to happen in the logbook, as well as this is the last chapter culminating moment for the regular story as well. So we get this kind of, this is the end moment from this prologue as well.
Yeah.
So good. So good.
There's a couple things that come to mind when reading this chunk. One of which is like, I want to know who this guy is and what the fuck happens in the end. But the other thing that I'm thinking about here is why has this logbook been kept by Rashek, the Lord Ruler? Like, why would he keep this? It doesn't track for me.
I think the reason that he ultimately decides to keep it is because it actually gives his story as the Lord Ruler a heroic route for everyone to like cheer and rah-rah for, like we were as we were reading the story, right? Like this seems like a path to becoming a hero, when in reality, Rashek, no one knows that his name is Rashek. He's just known as the Lord Ruler, right? So the Lord Ruler is believed to be this other person that's inside of the logbook. So he's just perpetuating that fake belief. And he uses it as this holy text to uphold himself as a way of guising himself and, like, I don't know, presenting a better face or front.
Wouldn't it just be easier to not have the story from before?
Potentially. But I think it's such a good... The reason that I would say that he would choose to keep it is, A, it's a remembrance of what happened for him, because he actually knows what's going on for real inside of that logbook. And then, B, I feel like it what else is he going to do? I guess he could write his own sacred holy text, but is a falsified text going to be as pure as this? I feel like it's a matter of convenience to some degree for him, but
the text is suppressed by everybody to begin with, other than whoever has access to that room.
Right, which are the Inquisitors. So I think it's his way of keeping them in line for the holy journey, the holy and the obligators, and like Tavidian. And so like the Steel Ministry is really the people who would, kind of worship at this altar.
Okay. Fair. I can see that.
Yeah. It's not as though everyone knows this story. Everyone else kind of knows a verbal version of the story. As we find out, like Vin really knows it's like, oh, the Lord Ruler saved us from the deepness. And that's just kind of the general understanding. There's nothing else there. As it's kind of distilled itself over 1,000 years. So, yeah, I understand. And I get the kind of skepticism of sorts, but...
Skepticism.
It sounded like someone just like knocked off a railing off of my stairs. Like it was super loud on my end. Did you hear that?
I heard it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It sounded really like, whoa, what happened? Vin goes from this last scene that we saw into launching into the air among the spires of Critic-Shaw, and it paints, I think, my favorite image of the whole book. The torches are kind of like fireflies. They're not described as fireflies. They're phosphorescent bugs or insects, I think is how he describes them. But like fireflies, lighting up the night and the morning coming just over the horizon as she's among all of these spires in the air. And you get the sense of finally that yellow sun kind of returning versus the red. And you get this interesting color palette and picture. And the whole thing feels incredible, cinematic, a little bit emotional. Right before the moment of conflict that is really going to kick us into the shit of things. It's a really nice calm before the storm.
I think that's a great way to describe it. Calm before the storm. This is something that's hard to describe, but bringing the conversation into the term cinematic. The way Brandon Sanderson writes, the way he writes this basically adds an interstitial transition. I guess those are synonymous with each other, but it's these interstitial cinematic moments that you see in film or in TV shows or in visual stories being told in general that I feel like are not often portrayed in text. Like this backed up view of the scene kind of really bringing the next bit of scenery into focus. I don't know. It makes me really appreciative of the way he writes it and looking forward to any sort of adaptation that could come out of that, because I feel like it could be very closely tied to the book, even in those aspects.
Yes, I do agree. I do quite agree. I think that what's so interesting about the way that Brandon writes something like this is obviously, like you said, the fixation on the cinematic, right? This is abnormal for the medium, and I could not agree more. I think that some people nail this, and other folks, they're writing. It's a novel. Like, you treat your medium as you want to treat it, or as it should be treated. But often some of these incorporations you can only get away with if you have very specific set of rules. And Brandon has built rules in which we can see our protagonist propel herself through the air and then see a big wide open shot. In a science fiction series, you might be able to see like the bow of a spaceship and get like a big picture there. Cool. That's a great cinematic moment. In another fantasy series, you're probably seeing most everything from the ground unless you hop up to like, I don't know, an eagle's perspective, for instance, that could have saved the day. That would have been like another good way of like showing a big wide pan shot. But often you don't have a moment in which your protagonist gets to propel you into that giant, massive framing shot. And it's typically left to whoever's adapting it to create those moments and to recognize when they could happen. And I think that's one of the benefits here is that this novel feels eminently adaptable, be it a movie, be it a mini series. I imagine this is like a 3-episode mini series, so 2.5 hour movie, I guess.
We imagine everything as mini series, Crossland.
I think imagining things as mini series is mostly the right way to go when you're talking about adapting, except for maybe The Warehouse, because that is almost a perfect movie. But needless to say, you could do it as a mini series, though. The more that I think about it, you could it's almost like devs, right? Like there's anyway. Don't need to talk about it.
Coming up soon, check out our Short Pour episode on our Short Pour podcast, spin-off podcast, Words and Whiskey Short Pour, where we talk to Rob Hart, author of The Warehouse and author of The Paradox Hotel, which is coming out soon, both of which have been optioned for adaptation. So
yeah, everything he's written has been optioned. Everything. He's 100%.
Has it been everything?
Yeah, the Ash McKenna series, as well as the James Patterson novel that he co-did with James Patterson. But yeah.
He's such a fun person to talk to, too.
Dude's great. Dude's a great writer, too.
A little bit of a plug there for our side.
Yeah, check it out. Check it out if you haven't.
Podcast.
You'll love it. There's so much joy coming there soon. But yeah, this scene is a fantastic moment, especially as you could imagine it being portrayed. Like, this is... You only get this if you're able to properly set it up. Like, you can't cheat and cut to this. You know? Like, that's... Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the thing. You can imagine... You don't get... This is a great comparison. You don't get the shot in the Shining movie of, like, approaching the hotel over the lake nearly as clearly as you do in the movie when you get the camera that kind of zooms over and rides the helicopter down to the hotel. You don't get that in the book. You do in the movie. And so this is an example of the only reason that you can get that in the book is because we have the system in place for you to get it.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's perfect.
The context to deliver it. So we start off the storm, as we've called it, in Carr's perspective, where he's receiving a promotion to be in charge of the Steel Ministry as a whole. The benefit here, of course, of being dipped into Carr's perspective for a page and a half is a ton of information about how Inquisitors work. What did you think about our dip into his perspective?
I think the biggest thing to talk about is something that we talked about, I think, last week. Mm-hmm. They're able to see the iron in people's blood and within people and within basically everything. Because we've talked about how Vin early on, before she realized that she was a Mistborn or realized what allomancy was, received like trace metals from the things that she was consuming. And they're able to see that, which makes total sense. But also from Carr's perspective, we realize that these Inquisitors are not mindless shells of people, but in fact, they're capable and have intelligence and freedom of choice, which, I don't know, I figured that was the case, but I could have seen it and I could have believed that they were more robotic than what they are. So it was cool to get confirmation from that.
I don't want to draw an immediate comparison here necessarily, but do you remember when we read Breach of Peace by Daniel Green? This reminds me, like the Inquisitors in general remind me of the Anointed.
Yeah.
So they've got very similar, but I question, we don't have the answer yet because we've only read, the first novella, but in the case of the Anointed, you question whether or not they're in charge or if something else is in charge, which is interesting.
Right.
Versus here, it seems as though they have their own authority.
Or at the very least, they're conscious.
They have free will. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. I don't know why I couldn't think of that word.
All good. It's because it's early. Did you have coffee this morning?
I did, but only half a pot. I usually have a pot and a half.
Are you kidding?
Well, okay. Not a pot, like not in like the traditional sense of a pot of coffee.
You've got a smaller, like 4 cup?
No, it's a French press.
Oh, okay.
So it's Kaylin and I split a French press right away, and then I make another one for myself afterwards.
Got it.
Yeah.
I do a pour over, and pour over extracts more of the caffeine. So I do 1 fucking cup, and I'm shaking. More often than not, I've got like a third of my cup left at the bottom, and so I'm like sipping on that dregs all day, which is good. It tastes good because it's good coffee. But anyway.
Yeah.
I feel you. I understand. I just took a little bit of that to. I hope the mic captured that, but
I didn't. I didn't hear it, so it probably did.
Yeah, Audacity catches more things than Discord does, unfortunately and fortunately. But including all the fucking time I click my fucking mouth. I'm sorry, folks. I'm editing it all the time. So we're inside of Carr's perspective. I really like that you keyed into the idea of being able to see blood and stuff like that earlier. The thing is, though, that we know and we've learned that Vin can't, for instance. Vin's unable to. The Lord Ruler doesn't appear to be able to. So there's something different going on with Inquisitors, right? Like this, and why, I guess is kind of the question. Like, why do they have this sort of, I don't want to say, it's not prescient. Why do they have this other sense? Baked in.
Yeah. The Lord Ruler later uses the term, not imbued, but...
I think it is imbued, actually.
Is it imbued?
I think it is.
It's something at least very similar, which to me would mean that it's so much more intrinsic. Endowed fabrications,
specifically.
Yes. So we also don't know that the Lord Ruler can't. And I got the impression that he could affect internal metals based on the fact that he dislodges Vin's earring.
Right. He can infect internal metals, as we learn, because she feels like her guts are even being pushed on with the metals inside of them. I'm saying, well, okay, maybe that does mean that he's seeing iron lines. So,
yeah. I mean, we don't know. That wasn't declared either way. But. I think there's something to the spikes.
Okay.
And the spikes, I believe, are explicitly made of iron.
The eye spikes, yeah, I think that's stated. Yeah. So iron seeking iron makes sense to me. Man seeking woman. Yep, similar.
Yep.
I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
Bullshit. Anyway.
Those iron eyes are trying to mate with the blood.
Not unrealistic.
So, I don't know. I could see that being a reason for heightened senses in that respect.
Okay. Interesting. I fucking hate that that's became my catchphrase. Ever since I got called out, I've been editing out every time I say fucking interesting.
You say it
reducing the number
all the fucking time, man.
I know. It's like Gambit all over again, but different because it's a response. So I say it like a filler term. I think that is a good read, though. I think that's a fun perspective, and it's a great question to carry into the future. So we switch from perspectives. Actually, we see within his perspective a dazzling display of broken glass as it's thrown across the ground, as Vin breaks through and shoots through with a rush of coins the window here in Critic Shaw and busts into the room, ready to fucking go. It's so cool. But she immediately charges the Lord Ruler. So we switch from his perspective to her perspective, charging the Lord Ruler, burning the 11th metal, giving what you thought a try, trying to stab that visage of the Lord Ruler in the past. Of course, this doesn't work, and she's seized by Carr once again. What do you think? This whole thing is so cool.
It would have been so fucking cool if that had worked. I was convinced. I was absolutely convinced that would have been the app, the thing that would do it. She did talk about how he was incorporeal. She just passed through him, unlike her own visage with gold, which I don't know. That's making my brain go what the fuck is happening there? Because that was dismissed by and entirely written off, dismissed by, I think encapsulates it by Kelsier, saying no, it's just a visage, but she's able to feel it, and she remarks that it's different here. So there's something to it, and I don't know what it is yet, but I want to know, and I think we'll figure out in the future. But
right,
yeah, that was something we didn't really focus on that much in the past. Was because I'm pretty sure she mentioned it to Kelsier, and he brushed it aside, right?
The 11th metal or interacting with the
gold.
shadow. Gold. Interacting. Yeah. Kelsier almost entirely had brushed aside gold. And so Vin was taking her...
mentioned that she could, it felt physical, and he dismissed it.
Yes.
I believe. I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm. No, she totally did. He dismissed it entirely for her. So that definitely tracks. Yeah.
But man, I was so convinced that would have been I was so ready for it to be basically low pan.
You were so excited for that to actually be the way that it went, and it was not quite that way. That makes sense. But then a second Inquisitor saves Vin, yanks out Carr's central spike out of his back, rendering him to just a pile of bones and flesh on the floor. And metal, I guess. This Inquisitor, Marsh, had taken out all of the other Inquisitors by yanking those same spikes, leaving the Lord Ruler to fend for himself as he calls for assistance. He jumps to the Lord Ruler, tears open the back of his shirt, clearly assuming the same spike would be there, and it isn't.
lots to think about here. First and foremost is, did we ever actually see Marsh's body, or was it like this Marshish body that was all mangled and fucked with?
So we were led to believe by Kelsier in the reaction that it was Marsh, because that was the only thing that made sense. However, it was painted that there was so much blood in the room that it was almost unbelievable, the amount of blood that was everywhere. So that it came from a single body. So it's a very subtle thing to like pick up on or try to knock into to understand what was going on. But Kelsier also believed that and wasn't given that much time, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes inside the room as a whole before they had to run because they're afraid of being hunted and killed. Inside that room. Yeah. I think that the moral there is that we didn't really know, but the assumption was that it was Marsh and that there were no further communications, and especially given the note that Marsh left, it felt as though this was the end of Marsh.
Right. The conflict with the Lord Ruler gave me vibes of like Dark Souls. And how you really have to figure out, kind of by trial and error, what the pattern is and where the weaknesses are. And once you do that, you can go through the fights without that much issue. But it's the puzzle aspect of like, what are the weaknesses and what are the immunities?
That's a great way of putting it. This is a boss fight in a lot of ways. You know, there's an interesting original review that I'd read from back in the day when this came out. I didn't read it. I read a review that was released right when this book came out, right? And one of the complaints is that it felt like a video game inside that review. But I think that's actually a strength in a big way. I think that gives it a strict rule set.
So happy if the adaptation of this story was a video game instead of a movie or TV show. I would be so happy with that, because I think it could be done really well, not only because of the way that it's written, but the way that video games have gone in the past generation of like gaming consoles and of game releases. Like they're so much more cinematic than they used to be. And I think it could do it justice. It could do the entire story justice being a AAA video game.
Yeah.
I think.
I don't disagree with you at all. I think that what's really interesting as well here is that, so part of the story needs to be kept on rails, right, in order to make sure that we hit like things like soothing and kind of those moments, because you can't just soothe at any, you know, there's a weird part of this where it's like, you'd have to code so many rules into a video game that it would be hard to create enough of a system. However, you can also see things like The Witcher and Batman, for instance, the Arkham series, being a good example of what you could do with something like the iron and steel lines that show up, right? Like the blue lines to everything. And then you can move from there and see like the things that you can push and pull off of. So you could like jump to and then jump from. Very reminiscent of what I imagine, actually I've played it, but like how Spider-Man would work, except for I imagine with a controller in my hand, left to I pull and then right to I push. And whatever metal I'm targeting is like the pull, and then you get to it, and then you push off of it. And there's just so many interesting components there that I agree with you. I think that a video game would be fun, but I think that you wouldn't tell Vin's story. I think that would be
true.
That would be the most important thing, because while this story is incredible, a lot of this could be fixed by using different elementic powers at different times, potentially. Part of that's because of her lack of understanding and the way that she kind of unlocks them over the course of the story. But
yeah, I will say, if we were to follow the thread of a video game, it would make such a cool asymmetric multiplayer experience. Asymmetric, I think in video games is a little bit different in that it's like different rules for each side. This would be the same rule. It'd be more like an Overwatch kind of style, or a MOBA style,
like a hero style. Yeah,
everybody chooses a different Allomancer, like, and you create a team based on
or Ferrochemy,
five mistings.
Yeah,
and Mistborn aren't included. I think that could be a fun multiplayer experience.
I like that idea as like a MOBA or an Overwatch like. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But
you're right. The story itself, you're right. That would have to be more cinematic. That'd have to be more
it would have implications, I guess, is the thing. Like, as you unlock certain things, why it wouldn't go slightly differently. So, but I think in general, like, great counterexample, use Mistborn to tell Kelsier's story of, like, becoming an Allomancer.
Yeah.
There you go. Done. It's a great way. Great story to tell. So, oh, man, so cool. It's such a cool system. And I love that you brought up boss fights in Dark Souls, because that is kind of what they feel like. They feel like they've found a rule set, and so they're obeying the rule set, and it turns out that the Lord Ruler doesn't follow that.
But he does.
Yes.
It's just...
They made the wrong assumption.
Clever. Yeah. That's the entire thing that I appreciate about a Brandon Sanderson and the way that he writes this, is that it explicitly follows the rule set.
I love a Brandon Sanderson for following.
I love a Brandon. It was in as in like not a but UH. No, I know, but that's what I love about him and the way that he writes. In that everything is so explicitly rooted in the rules, and even when we're misled by the rules, in that. Some of the things that Kelsier pointed out, like you can't affect things that are embedded in your skin. They're wrong, but they're wrong for a reason in that they're just not strong enough. And nobody that has come before has been strong enough to exploit that inconsistency in the rule set that the Ska or the Mistings put forward.
Yeah. Right. And it's just that what does the strength even mean here? Right. Like how is he stronger? How do we define that? What's his difference? Is he closer to Allomancy somehow? And that, like, what does that mean is the hard part here. Right. The Lord Ruler, as we're talking about, is overwhelmingly powerful, able to completely and totally exceed everything Vin can do, storming across the room, throwing her around like a rag doll. His skin is pierced with rings, of which we know can't be pulled on generally, but she's pushed so hard that even her earring rips from her ear and her metals roil in her stomach, pushing her back. This is, as we're talking about, like a changing of the rules. Not a changing, but a shifting.
Yeah. It's a realization, and she brings up here... maybe it's not here, but she brings up at some point how she's astonished by what can happen and how it feels against the rules. But at the same time, Kelsier pointed out that nobody could use Allomancy through a copper cloud, and that was wrong.
And she was able to pierce it with bronze. Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's insanely powerful already. And we've established that the Lord Ruler we know is insanely powerful, and the Inquisitors, through Carr's perspective, we've understood that they can see the lines from people's blood, or from people and their inherent metal within them. It's not a stretch to assume that the Lord Ruler can affect that even harder. So it was just a fun unraveling reveal of what's going on.
Yeah, it's a contentious thing, I think, that could have been done a lot more poorly than it was actually executed, right? Because I think a part of the potential here is to completely flop this reveal, right? And to make it feel really cheap. Like, the fact that someone is breaking the rule system can feel really cheap, but the fact that it's been kind of set up and prologued this whole time to some degree by Vin's capability and abilities is... It helped add a layer of depth to that experience, to that understanding, because Vin seems to also be outside of the rules a little bit. So, something that it could have felt real bad. Like, this could have been a real bad moment if everything weren't so damn consistent. The Lord Ruler, as we've been discussing, kind of has this real sense of menace about him when he talks about his history of putting down rebellion and his state of godhood. It's really something, I think, to behold in this moment and really kind of exposing his character, of course, as we find out. I really love this a little bit. He goes over to Marsh and says that he's made him dominant and that he's given him these powers. And then it all clicks in place for Vin, that the Lord Ruler is Rashek, not the man from the journal, the Pac-Man of whom was described in the journal. He killed the hero and took his place. And this is a secret that I really, 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 really want your reaction on. holistically, and the way that impacts, you and your thoughts of the story.
So first and foremost, he mentions that he's been beheaded.
Yeah.
And he's lived through it. Like, that's fucking crazy. He completely glances over that, or at least Vin does. This entire reveal caught me off guard. And I don't know if there are signs beforehand that would point to it in hindsight. So I'm excited to like read through that and figure it out and like look at all of those logbooks from a different perspective. But yeah, it really threw me off. I'm like, oh shit, that it makes sense. It really makes sense. But at the same time, God, was I not expecting it. I did make an official prediction, I believe. I believe it was an official prediction that the man writing the logbooks at the beginning of every chapter was the Lord Ruler, and that is no longer true. So I think I have to drink for that, huh?
I think you do. I think that was very early on before we started doing the official tracking like we were doing. So I do think you owe me a drink. Yeah. I've been waiting for this for a long time.
Yeah, that was...
I think this is actually one of those that
I think you drank for it.
I did drink, so
you
I think
drank for
it. I didn't want to ruin it.
Yeah, I've got to compensate.
Yeah. I agree.
All right.
There you go. So, regardless, this is so fucking cool. This reveal that it's Rashek is massive and such a change because it completely shifts our perspective on the logbook. We've been talking about this being the Lord Ruler and the way that influenced his ruling style. And we said that there's this strange dissonance that the Well of Ascension must have changed this man when in reality he never made it.
Yeah. Did you like follow the same threads I did? Your first time reading it?
I did not pick up that it was a different person. I was like, Rashek's weird, but like, I don't know.
It makes sense that now you're like constantly asking me about Rashek through the whole fucking story. I'm like, he's fine, whatever. Like, he's an antagonist to a certain extent to this Lord Ruler character that we're talking about. Fucking wild.
Right? It is absolutely buck wild, fucking insane.
It was a really good reveal. Like, that was a really like textbook reveal.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a slap in the face in a big way. And it's especially because it's been this story paralleling our story within a story even. It feels good. It hurts at the same time.
Yep.
Fuck yeah. But there it is. There we also get the reveal that he is both an allomancer and a feruchemist. All this explained his unnatural powers as this clicks in Vin's head and she's being pressed against. On the outside, mist flows into the building from the outside of the building, which we know is unnatural. Mist doesn't do that. It stays outside of buildings, even with open doors. And this is not something that normally occurs. And she's pulling and pulling and pulling and then draws on the mists in that single line of text as it's put on the page. It's just like a break line of she pulls in the mists and she's able to see these two new lines appear and yanks until his bracers on his upper arms yank free, the ones that aren't pierced through the skin, and are removed from the Lord Ruler. And he's made into this decaying mop of a man on the ground. Sad wet mop.
Sad wet mop. Decaying mop of a man. What a description, man. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. So that reveal in general was it was interesting because my mind got going. My mind got going, man. Thinking about how possible it is for Vin to possess the same traits. And what it really got me thinking about was Vin's mother. And I think based on a few different contexts that I'll talk about, that she was a feruchemist. And it like I said, it explains several things. One was this metal earring that she left Vin, which is probably one of her like feruchemical focuses, or at the very least is something that Vin could use as a focus. She was able to convince the guards that were sent towards her to be lenient and let her live. which probably involves whatever the ferrochemical equivalent to soothing is. I don't know if you'd still call it soothing.
It's not. So remember that all of ferochemy is internal. All of it. You're only ever affecting yourself.
Ah, okay.
So just as a clarification.
I mean, that pushes against my reasoning quite a bit, because that was a big part of it. Like, how did she survive if she was able to... No, actually, what if she was both...
I think that's what you're suggesting, aren't you?
No, what I was suggesting was that she got her allomancy through her father's pure bloodline.
Right.
And her ferochemy from her
mom
mother.
Was also a full... Yeah. Yeah, right.
But if her mother had access to soothing as well, and was maybe a limited dual, like, allomancy ferochemist, I don't know. There are thoughts. I didn't think about the fact that ferochemy was entirely internal, because a lot of this, like, thought process was based on the fact that she was able to survive, and my thought on that was that she was able to soothe the guards that were sent to kill her and, like, alter their thought processes. I don't know. Now I don't know as much, but I think at the very least, Vin received something ferochemical genetically from her mother and had this insanely pure bloodline from her father that made her a Mistborn as well.
Okay.
That's my thought. If you want to make it an official prediction, that's my prediction.
I'm making it an official prediction. We're going to keep that until we resolve this question, and we will come back to it when it is resolved. So I think that's what's so fun about this is that unlike Red Rising and other books potentially, is that this is actually truly, like, some of these questions are series spanning in their own right. So it's fun in that way. Because when are you going to learn that information? When are you going to know? When, like, we haven't figured out, we posed the question, but we talked about it. When does Vin snap? We don't know that yet.
Yeah, we still don't know.
Right.
Because we haven't had any actual confirmation that she had her luck, as she called it at that point, with Reen, right?
I believe so. I think we've been over this a couple of times, but yes.
We have. Yeah. I know. I just want to make sure. Because
no
I'm still of the opinion that Reen abandoning her is her snapping point, and I don't want to be, like, cut down at the knees right away because of something I missed from the first, like, chunk of this book.
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay.
But this is the end of the Lord Ruler, right? Like, this is the end of Rashek, the Lord Ruler. And Vin, of course, is victorious over the Lord Ruler and poses the question to herself, why am I different? Why can I do things that he can? And this obviously ties into what you were just saying, but I want to ask you and bait this official prediction. Why do you think she can do what she can?
Well, I think I mentioned this above, like before, that her mother was a ferochemist and passed that down to her. So she similarly has the same unique trait of being both. Somewhere up the line, there was a terraceman that escaped the fate of most of the terracemen, of either just absolute eradication or sterilization. So I think that's why, that she's both, and that doesn't really exist. And it hasn't existed since the inception of the Allomantic bloodline.
Okay. All right.
Yep. That's my guess.
Sounds good. There's this final moment that we exchange with the Lord Ruler, and I think it's a really wonderful one, and one that's been 1,000 years coming in its own right, that Rashek has earned his awful end, dissolving like that wet mop on the floor. I guess, is he wet? He's more like a dried mop, as we think about it, because his skin is wrinkling inwards and just kind of decaying in general. But before Vin kills him, he says something. You don't understand. You don't know what I do for mankind. I was your god, even if you couldn't see it. By killing me, you have doomed yourselves. Ooh.
Well, fuck. I'm assuming that the deepness or whatever it is whatever the deepness is, wasn't actually defeated and was kept at bay to a certain extent and constantly needs suppression. And that's what the Lord Ruler is doing constantly to not overtake humanity, which was the point. That was the whole journey initially through the logbooks, was to defeat the deepness because it was a threat to humanity. So if it wasn't defeated but was just suppressed and had to constantly be kept at bay, that would explain this quote, I think.
Okay. That's definitely a prediction.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Vin, of course, ends up killing the Lord Ruler with a spear, in the same kind of way that ultimately Kelsier was killed. And it feels like this kind of full circle moment, especially with her final lines. I bring you a message from a friend of ours. He wanted you to know that he's not dead. He can't be killed. He is hope. And then she rams that spear right through his fucking heart.
Yeah. It's poetic. It's very poetic.
Here's a question. You didn't think that the Lord Ruler was going to die last week.
I didn't.
Were you shocked by this turn?
I was. Entirely. Very shocked. I don't think his influence is gone, though.
Okay. We kind of get hints of that in the epilogue.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, we do. But, yeah, I absolutely expected the Lord Ruler to be like a several books from now goal, as opposed to being ended here.
That poses some big questions. It's going to be so exciting. So with that, we're going to go into the epilogue, our final chapter of this book, our final little section we're going to talk about. I'm glad that this is actually titled an epilogue, because the story feels like this feels like, if we're talking about like a mystery or a thriller novel, the detectives kind of going through and breaking down exactly what happened and how it happened and how it all worked. This is that digestif period at the end of a mystery, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what this is. I mean, it's got that element of mystery and intrigue to it. So we lead off here, of course, with our final logbook entry from our hero of ages that never manifested. Oddly, on occasion, I sense a peacefulness within. You would think that after all I have seen, after all I have suffered, my soul would be a twisted jumble of stress, confusion, and melancholy. Often, it's just that. But then there is peace. I feel it sometimes, as I do now, staring out over the frozen cliffs and glass mountains in the still of the morning, watching a sunrise so majestic that I know none shall ever be its match. If there are prophecies, if there is a hero of ages, then my mind whispers that there must be something directing my path. Something is watching. Something cares. These peaceful whispers tell me a truth I wish very much to believe. If I fail, another shall come to finish my work.
So I think that last sentence is what's the most relevant to our story, but maybe not the most interesting to talk about. But addressing that part, I think we're led very clearly to believe that Vin now is the one to follow his footsteps and achieve what he couldn't in his failure. And that's assuming that there's something to be achieved, as like assuming that the entire point wasn't just stolen from Rashek. Like,
stolen from our hero. You mean our boy, the guy who wrote the logbook.
Stolen by Rashek. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So the idea of the hero of ages,
our boy, the hero of ages. Yes.
Isn't the hero of ages yet, because that prophecy has not yet been fulfilled. It's making that assumption. I'm making that assumption in that Vin will become the prophesized hero of ages, because whatever was done to steal the title of the Lord Ruler was not fulfilling that prophecy.
Okay.
I don't know what implications that has. I don't know what that means, but I think that this is alluding to the idea that there is somebody that will come after this author, and that person is Vin.
The context that we get definitely leans us into believing that Rashek stole this from our boy, the hero of ages, the potential hero of ages, I guess. And the context that we're left with from this section is, I think, innumerable. There are a couple of different notes here to kind of talk about. One is the obvious, the direct comparison to Vin, as you're making mention of, and sort of the idea that the prophecy goes on past this. This is sort of, again, it's the epilogue, so this is teasing the next thing, kind of, and also wrapping up the story at the same time. So this feels like a teaser for the future story, as it were to unfold, potentially.
So I'd like to get your input going off of that. Mm-hmm. Is an epilogue technically, should it be read with the same weight as other chapters in a story?
I think it should be read with a different weight. I think it's generally meant to be, okay, this is going to be something that is not going to make sense for people who haven't read the book, but think about us reading Recursion, right? The end of Recursion is that final moment in which he gets to meet up again, right? It's that, it's kind of the circling. I don't want to, this feels like such an inappropriate metaphor, but like it's the circling of the drain in its own way. It's meant to wrap up themes. It's meant to wrap up elements of the story. The warehouse even has a very similar kind of moment and element. Like we've gotten kind of our resolution in a big way, and we see our character either make a final decision or thematically come to terms with what happened in the story. So I often think of epilogues as nails in the coffin, but this is a nail that reaches through because we know it's a series. So like this is the rest of the content of the epilogue is mostly wrapping things up and explaining it in case you have any questions. So like it does a job of like answering questions, and we'll definitely get into that in a minute. But this part is more thematically resonant, I think, than the rest of the epilogue, except for the very end with Elend. Does that make sense? Does that kind of answer it? Like it's not a regular chapter. It's meant to be the closing of the book. It's not quite a coda, because like a coda could be a different, like that's a pause. It's a different moment, which sometimes comes instead of an epilogue in certain stories. But yeah, epilogue feels specific. It's meant to be the exit of a story. You could end before this, in theory. Like you don't have to read the epilogue, but you're missing context if you do. Yeah,
I mean,
that's the proposal of the epilogue from like a Shakespearean sense. Like the epilogue is not necessary to enjoy Macbeth. It is instead like a summation of Macbeth.
Just thinking about the theoretical and like high school taught structure of a story, if we ended without the epilogue, it would end at climax essentially with no resolution. Like this is kind of fulfilling the resolution.
This is, in this case, this is declining action. Yes. This is our declining action, because that is actually, I think, one of the craziest things about this book is that the declining action is 10 fucking pages, which is wild. Generally, it's a little bit longer than that. Even Recursion is like 20 pages.
But this entire section was 35 pages. Right. And we went from like, we learned so much about the entire story as a whole, and killed the Lord Ruler, and learned about everything else.
Right.
The entire...
This is the Sanderlanche.
This is less than... What would you call this? Less than... Like, this is like 5% of the story.
Yeah.
And there's so much that happens here.
Right.
So...
Yep. I don't disagree. I think that it is a choice that Sanderson makes. And it's an authorial choice, but I think in general you can look at an epilogue as a summation and thematical remuneration of what the story is going for. Right. So in theory, you can excise it, and people should be able to take away what's existing inside of the epilogue. In the case of mysteries and stuff like that, sometimes it's used for additional exposition just to clarify things in case things were wonky. But that's how I think about epilogues. I'm pro epilogue. I am wishy-washy on prologues. So. To that point, though, I just want to reiterate that this initial logbook entry, or this final logbook entry, I should say, from the Lord Ruler, not the Lord Ruler, Jesus Christ, from our boy, the Hero of Ages, or the potential Hero of Ages, he is also talking about how beautiful the world is. And he's giving this kind of, this other philosophical component, I think, here to the story, this flourish, this idea of like this beautiful end of things, and the way that like how important saving the world is and how that turns everything around in a big way. And the sort of moment of peace and belief, I think, permeates this in the prophecy in himself and other things. And I think that it's comforting to know despite the Hero of Ages never reaching the well, as far as we're aware, and Rashek taking that power, that I think he would have been a better steward of power than he was ever given credit for, and that he would have done the right thing in context. And that's a tough thing to grasp. Like, our farm boy hero, our Luke Skywalker, was stopped at the 11th hour from doing the right thing.
Yeah. God, calling him Luke Skywalker is a trip. What do I make of that, man? I think there's so much I want out of this character. And now, hypothetically, everything is lost. I don't think that's true. I think there will be a journal that we find from Rashek that will be supplemental to this logbook that we have. Call that a prediction if you want. I think that'll exist. And I think we'll get that. Because I think there's going to be so much that could be learned even from a ferochemical standpoint about what's possible, and from a historical standpoint of what happened that could be gained from this, from something like that existing. And it would make a very easy way of disseminating that information without breaking any sort of mold, because we already have the expectation that these logbooks exist. So next book, getting logbook entries from Rashek parallel to these logbooks, I think would both make sense, would be satisfying, and would give us context that we need going forward.
Interesting. Fucking hate that I said that there. I am so glad that you have that theory and idea going into the next book. I'm not gonna discuss it further, but I like what you're positing and where your brain is going, because I think that it speaks to what Brandon has encouraged throughout this novel, right? Like, that is entirely what he's leaning into. Is he's really leading you to speculate. Like, he is with a very wide brush leading you to believe everything has its place, everything has a rule, I've got it all planned, and so I'm leaving you with these questions, and now deal with it. Fucking deal with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've only got a couple of things left to talk about with this book, but I think one of the big things here is the end of the book really covers 4 different topics here, as we've kind of flirted around this time. Ellen's establishing of the government being the new kind of king, Inquisitors and their powers, Khandra and how they operate, as well as a detailed explanation of the compounding effects of ferochemical abilities and allomantic abilities, as well as some theories therein. I want to leave this end kind of freeform for you. Which ones do you want to tackle first, and what do you want to talk about? Of course, I'm not going to reveal anything, but we can discuss them kind of openly.
Yeah. I think we just kind of go in order of how they're revealed within the book.
Sure.
So starting with allomancy and ferochemy and their sort of interactions. I appreciate very much that even after the story culminates, we get this detailed explanation of the physics behind allomancy and ferochemy and how they interact with each other. Like, it makes for a really exciting speculation going forward, but it also just satisfies my need for rules. I think it's not necessary, and I think that's why it makes sense to live within an epilogue, because that part isn't necessary to know, but we get a breakdown in a very scientific way. So I don't know, it makes for something really exciting going forward there. Anything? I'm going to leave you sort of a spot here after each section to go forward.
Pause
anything you want to...
I think that you're right. And I think that that's what's so fun about this, is this reiterates the rules just to clarify them in case anything was confusing about what just happened. Let's say you got through the end and didn't understand, outside of maybe like the mists thing or whatever the fuck happened there. You get an understanding of allomancy. You get an understanding of ferochemy, just to make sure that you understood what happened. So if you didn't, you could read this and then go back and be like, oh, okay, I see exactly how that worked. It was a great meta tool, as well as, just general explainer, exposing the mystery.
Yeah. Both similarly and in contrast to that, we get information on the Inquisitors And they're, like I said, they're still kind of shadowed a little bit in mystery. But we know that there are now 11 spikes, not just the 2 in the eyes and the 1 in the back. And removing one allows them all to kind of fall. So
11's a curious number, isn't it?
It is. 8 in the chest is weird.
I feel like those are numbers that we recognize.
11. Where does 11 come in?
I don't know. Think about it for a second.
Medals, number of medals. But we also posit that there's more than that. We just we know about 10. We posit about we know the existence of 11, but there's a 12th that's theorized by Vin, right? And there's ferrochemical metals that the Lord Ruler clearly utilizes that aren't understood, like making him younger. Like that's something that Sazed can't do.
It's not that he can't do it, it's that he doesn't think that it's useful. He says that in this end. Because ultimately the end goal here, so this is something that's clarified instead of the Allomancy Feruchemy bit, is he says that ultimately it isn't useful because you're storing your youth to expend later to look younger. So that doesn't benefit you in the long run unless you're able to compound it with a different metal. So because he's an Allomancer and a Feruchemist, he can use 2 metals in conjunction to give him the appearance of age without actually, and the storage of age, to create a cycle for him in which he can actually compound it and make it more. So if he stores a year, because he's also an Allomancer, he can expend it and make it more than... In a rudimentary explanation. I'm not going to go into the super big details, but that's effectively what's being said. So I'm definitely talking about the number of metals here. I'm just gonna fucking feed you what I'm talking about, because that is curious that we know 11 metals and there are 11 spikes.
There is,
We theorize other things, but we know that there are 11.
I feel like if each spike was a different metal, we would... There would be comment on the fact that each spike in the eyes were different.
That's true. Yeah.
And I feel like they're both referred to as like iron, essentially. But iron and steel clearly, like, understandably, are like, steel is an alloy of iron, and maybe could look as closely similar to each other as possible, and could be placed side by side and still be seen as the same metal. I don't know. It's a lot to think about. I just feel like if they were different, we would have been, the difference would have been remarked on. I don't know. But yeah, 11 is interesting. We are on to Kandra, I believe. Something that gets revealed here is that Kandra require not only the bones of the deceased, which we knew about, but also the fact that they have to eat the flesh of whoever they're imitating. And I think what makes that really interesting and important is that it implies they can't imitate somebody who's died more than a certain amount of time ago. Like, it creates an hourglass of how long it takes, or how long somebody could be dead before they could be no longer intimidated, you know?
Yes, yeah, it creates parameters around what a Kandra can and cannot do. Again, this kind of restricts it, saying that they have to eat the flesh and the bones in order to become the person. And we kind of made jokes about bones before.
We did. Yeah. We knew it was the bones, for sure. But this preemptively creates rules for who and why they can impersonate certain people.
Even. Yeah.
So, I don't know. Again, depth of rule sets and my appreciation for that. So, I'm happy with that. Beyond that, we don't get anything more about Kandra. As far as the obligators go, and their connection to Elend, and Elend's rule as king, I think using the obligators as a tool makes sense. And it makes sense from both directions, in that the obligators, as who says it? I can't remember. I don't think it was Sazed. See Elend as somebody who could be easily manipulated, Who was that? Do you remember that comment?
Wasn't it Doxson?
It might have been It might have been Doxson.
Yeah.
I think that's right. So it makes sense Marsh, that they would join to be like, could have been Marsh. They would fall in line because he's easily manipulated and they could get what they want out of that. But at the same time, it'd be folly.
Marsh also said that he was in charge of the Steel Ministry now because he's the last Inquisitor. So on top of that, he was just granted authority over them. Right. So I think that's where Marsh comes back and retorts to whomever says that. It's like, no, like I'm in charge of them indirectly as a vestige of the Lord Ruler's power. Yeah, but ignoring that idea and that conflict and the possibility of double crossing, or actually kind of leaning into the idea of double crossing, not bringing the obligators into the fold, knowing that they're trained bureaucrats and like really good at what they do, would pose a threat to whoever takes charge, to Elends, for being overthrown by a group of very well-trained bureaucrats. So, a couple different directions where the rationalization could come from. Cool. All right. Yeah. Anything else in the group? I love those reads. I really enjoy them, and I think that it's, that's basically how they should be read. There's not a whole lot to like predict out of these because these are meant to kind of be it's pretty clear of the story at large. Yeah. The whole epilogue is pretty clear. Yeah. Pretty without things to read into for the most part. So, yeah. Cool. That's what I've got. With that, we move into the formal end of the book, right? So the beginning of Vin's perspective, kind of in that first chapter, we hear this whisper of Reen, her half-brother, in the back of her head. And here in the book, we also lead into our ending with a very similar whisper of they'll all abandon you in the end, in the beginning, and now it's go back and be with Elend. And I think that's so interesting because it portrays that change in Vin and the change of the way that maybe she can read some of the trauma that's been inflicted on her and how she can kind of shift her own internal dialogue with herself, or how she has shifted it over the course of the book, to go back and be with Elend and have this happy moment in her life with her friends and with Elend. Yeah. I mean, I think it goes beyond friends. Well, I'm not saying that Elend and her are friends. Yeah. I'm trying to say with the other people. They're obviously in their own relationship. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Clarification. But I loved, like, this whole thing is so fucking cute, man. Yeah. Like the way she accosts him at the end of this story, and like she's tearing up and clearly like she's feeling more than what she's about to say, but parroting something that was mentioned earlier when she first met him was, you read too much, especially in the presence of ladies. Yeah, right. Like, it's very close to that. I know it's not explicitly exactly that quote, but I think it's pretty much it. Yeah, it's pretty close. You actually put it exactly. You read too much, especially in the presence of ladies. Yeah, that's literally what it is. All right, perfect. Awesome. Good work. Is this the first, maybe it's not the right way to call it, but it's very much the feeling of a happy ending that we've had on this show as far as books go? Like there's yeah, pretty much. Like this is the only like positive, like fully positive resolution, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are few and far between the moments that we've had so far. So this felt good. One. It felt really good. All right. That's the end of the book, PJ. End of the fucking book, man. Any other thoughts? My thought is that in more than a week, we record like the ending, like the finale of this book. Like we always have a guest come on and talk about the book. Next week, we've got Lindsay doing that with us, who tomorrow you're recording another podcast with her. She gets 2 episodes in a week. Yeah. Which I'm excited to listen to. Yeah. Frankly. But that means that for a week, I have nothing to read because I don't want to spoil myself and like read into the next book before the wrap up.
So, any suggestions on what I can read in the next week going
you should
forward?
Read Gideon the Ninth, maybe.
Okay.
For a fun little thing that maybe we'll talk about in a bit. That might be. We're not going to talk about it today, but maybe soon. Maybe soon.
Maybe soon we'll talk about that. Soon. Interesting.
Yeah, could be.
I can do that. Yeah.
With that, we're going to move into PJ's prediction. So we're moving this onto the end of the episode, and I think this might be how we do it going forward, depending on how it feels. But as opposed to kind of doing it on the front end, wherein we kind of spoil shit that we're going to talk about, let's talk about it at the end, and we can kind of summate our feelings and take our drinks and sacrifice ourselves to the gods right at the end of the show. So,
yeah.
With that, we have the first one here, Red, which you said, or I posed the question. Sazed also talks about Rashuk, the leader of the Lord Ruler's packmen, and of the terrorist religion of which is mentioned being completely removed from the face of the earth, destroyed by the Lord Ruler and his actions. Why do you think the Lord Ruler would want to bury the terrorist religion that had propped him up in the first place? This is I don't care about your answer yet. This is a really interesting question because the assumption here also states that the Lord Ruler is the guy in the logbook, right? So this question is back-framed from the perspective of whoever's writing the logbook being the Lord Ruler. Yeah. Right. What we're explicitly explained.
Yeah.
So, your answer.
If there's any dishonesty that got him to where he is now, they'll remember, and the possibility of his secrets getting out could be his entire undoing.
So it's that end phrase is why I latched into this being correct for you. However, for the wrong fucking reasons. Like you nailed in to why the Lord Ruler in the present is doing what he's doing. You didn't do it based on the logbook. So I'm giving it to you because you nailed the present context. Not
Can we both drink? Because
we can both drink. That's fine. I'll take that. That's fine.
That is not where I was coming from. Like, I stumbled into the right answer.
When you fucking said it, I went, oh, oh shit, he's got it.
Yeah, I mean,
for the wrong
yes,
reasons. You know?
I'm right, but that's not where I was coming from. So,
okay.
I'll drink, but you're drinking too.
Cheers. All right.
Cheers.
Here's a random prediction that you made in an episode. You said Vin is some wild alternate timeline version of the Lord Ruler using gold. And that's so incorrect. It's so wildly incorrect.
That could have been so cool, though.
It could have been. It could have been really cool.
That could have been
like
such
Looper.
a cool thing.
It would have been Looper the book. And you know how much I love Looper, so.
Yeah.
I feel.
You didn't mention Looper with Rob Hart, by the way. I thought you would have.
I fucking didn't. I can't believe that I didn't. I was actually going to talk about it,
I was going to mention that you loved it when he was talking about like time loop stories.
So
I didn't because I thought you would.
He and I actually had a conversation via the form of the Lit Reactor class about Looper. So like it felt like it would have been odd rehashing that. I don't know. So inside of the class, I had that conversation already. So it felt weird, but I didn't. So, but you're right. I maybe should have brought it up because I could have. I'm going literally, we're already giving away my answer to this question anyway, this week's question. So, and I didn't write it down. You're just pulling it out of me. So we have a conversation about how foolish Elend is for wearing metal versus wood and how the Lord Ruler wears metal and rings so as to encourage the nobility to do so, as though some piece of art or a part of his plan. Seems like foreshadowing. This is the most direct I've ever been with a fucking question. And I said, what you thinking?
I think it's absolutely part of his plan, or at least allows for some oversight. Maybe he's able to sense metals to a very specific degree. True. And is able to know people's whereabouts through that. Kind of true. I get that this is flagged as a prediction. So that's what I'm going with, but not fully convinced of it myself.
I am going to call this a push because I think you're wrong, actually. I'm going to go ahead and say I think
I'm wrong. I think I'm wrong.
It was really the Farrakami that he was hiding. Like, that's what he was hiding here.
It wasn't that he... Like, I don't think he was encouraging people to wear jewelry in general. I think that was just what people do when they worship someone, is emulate them.
Oh, I think he was directly encouraging it through his own lavish appearance, right? So they are worshiping him for that, but it is a way of disguising his Farrakami.
Yeah. Okay.
And making it seem commonplace.
I can feel that. Yep. Yeah. Cheers.
So next question, technically find out a little bit later that this is the end of the logbook. Kaput, no mas. Given what we know, where's your head at with this?
I think Sazed is right. I keep fucking with the way I say it.
Either way is fine.
I think Sazed makes more sense. So I think Sazed is right, more or less, that since he's now immortal, what he does, what need does he have to write things down for himself? I would be surprised if he doesn't have a perfect memory now. Yeah, that was entirely going on the assumption that the person writing was also the Lord Ruler. And we know now that that's not true, so I'm drinking for that.
Definitely true. Definitely something that you were taking a drink for. All right, so here is another one here. Marcia's note details an interesting question. Where does the power difference of an Inquisitor come from? Why are they so much stronger than traditional Allomancers, and how do they recruit the Mistborns into the agency? So your answer is a little bit separate. I just want to clarify. We know that they aren't Mistborns that are recruited. There was a misting in this case.
Yeah.
And he displays additional allomantic powers.
Correct. And I think they're made, not found, was my answer to that. Which is
a drink for
entirely
me.
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that was a stretch, though. I feel like we knew that. There were so many heavy implications of,
yes, we addressed this one literally at the beginning of last week, being like, we want to address this because it's not clear. Now it's perfectly fucking crystal clear. I knew what I was getting into. Yeah. So next one, the next day, Vin and Sazed share a conversation about the 11th metal and its potential and how the Keepers have heard no mention of it. This poses a question. Where did Kelsier hear of the 11th metal? How does he know its use? Do you have any ideas?
Well, we don't know its use. As far as how he knows about it, I'd be curious if this is the result of burning gold. Maybe he got into conversations with his alternate self. He mentioned that he doesn't think gold is really useful, but maybe he's hiding that for some reason. That's entirely false and kind of incoherent in approach.
Yeah, so that's a drink for you, so understandable there. We also have we're also going to go into the 11th metal short story at the end of this to kind of discuss a little bit there, because there's a short story. We're not going to read it. We could, in theory, read it this week, but we're not going to. Or next week, but yeah, we're going to touch that at the end of the series. With that, we go into the final prediction here. She breaks into the room and finds it odd, homey, strange, filled with old things, yellow paintings, and an old man in a chair who spins to see Vin as she explores the room. This, of course, is the Lord Ruler. Out of options, she burns the 11th metal and two different figures appear. One of a happy burly man in large furs, Rashek, and the other a smaller, mercantile-looking man. What's going on in your head right now about that?
So, all right, I'll read what I said, and then I've got something to talk about. All right, what I said was David Lopan, which is very clearly, explicitly a reference to Big Trouble in Little China, which if you haven't seen Big Trouble in Little China, please go watch it. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. We have a PJ's Symposium of Media and Whimsy episode about that. Here I'm plugging that, which I think
coming to your ears soon.
Yeah, we're going to be releasing that to the public because up until now that has been a Patreon exclusive show, but publicly release that. Anyway, I think there's something more to gold, like we've talked about, but there's also something similar about the 11th metal, like Vin mentions here. Maybe it's internal and external, following the other metals patterns. And the gold being internal means that there's inspection of an alternate future, and the 11th metal is more of an external source. External tangible source, that external thing that has tangibility to it, I think is the right way to put that. No.
So I'm saying
it's not quite it's not
yeah.
quite true.
I want to give you credit though for
working
the
around it.
Comparison.
I was close. The low pan comparison, I don't think quite makes it, because they're not both in existence at the same time.
Yeah.
You know? Like he just can kind of switch between avatars. to a certain extent.
Yeah, he's physically aging his body up and down in the case of Lord Ruler.
Right. Going back to it, there's the merchant guy that shows up. That's standing next to one of the Inquisitors, correct?
Yes. Sorry, you're right. Yes. Yeah. So it's the appearance of an Inquisitor there.
Right. So are we to believe that everybody has an alternate visage, or is it only specific people?
Do you think that could be the visage of who the Inquisitor was before he became an Inquisitor?
That's dependent on how an Inquisitor is made.
We kind of got the explanation of how an Inquisitor is made.
Kind of, not really, though. We know that there are several corpses that come into play, and it's something really unpleasant.
But Marsh looks like Marsh. So, like, it's not as though his form changed. I think it's safe to assume that the image in the 11th Metal for now is an appearance of the person as they could have been, or should, or were. That's the hard part to, like, read on this whole thing, is, like, where in their timeline are we looking with the 11th Metal, based on the information
much, right now? Much like snapping, there is a point where something major happens, and that's the point where the 11th Metal visage evolves from, maybe?
Yeah, potentially. It's like identity, in a way.
Yeah. I guess not evolves from, is. I think it'd have to be is, because the person that's depicted by the Lord Ruler, and Vin seeing them through the 11th Metal, is a young person. Not a 1,000-year-old creature that somehow can still exist.
Yeah, it's a younger version of the same person.
So it's
a lot gold, but external. Like, that's basically what it is.
The visage of whoever they were before that snapping, quote-unquote, point happens. Maybe not to the same, like, reasoning behind snapping, but like a defining point in somebody's life. Yeah,
that makes sense. Cool. I think we're going to push on that one, is basically the sort of sensibility for me, because it's neither. We're addressing neither. So no need to. We're just going to push. With that, we move into question of the week. PJ, do you want to take the first one here? Our question.
Are we going to do ours first?
No, let's read theirs and then we'll do ours at the end. Our question of the week this week is your favorite martyrs or sacrifice for the sake of a story. I think we might have done something very similar to this earlier, but this is more intense, extreme, direct.
Yeah. So, Tim Pearson. Tony in Endgame was heavy. The Logan sacrifice is up there. The T-800 in T2. Also Kyle Reese in T1. Ken in Bruges. In Bruges.
In Bruges.
In Bruges.
What a good movie.
In Bruges.
Yeah. In Bruges.
In Bruges. That was 5 answers. Tim, tighten up.
Tighten up. We love your answers, though. They're all right. They're all good. I think especially all of those hearken to the same kind of shit that we like.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Next up is Sharkbait. Okay, so mine is, and again, I should say, I should have put the spoiler warning at the very top. I might go back and edit it in. We are going to be spoiling things for this next section, so maybe skip a minute or two after this to hear what we're talking about if you would like to avoid spoilers. Some are going to be book, some are going to be otherwise. So,
yep.
So from Malazan, Book of the Fallen, it's definitely the Bridge Burners, which is a little niche, and it's a 10-book series, and it is notably. People have said that it's a very difficult series to get through, but it's worth it in the end, kind of a thing. Have not touched it yet. It is definitely on my TBR radar. They're my forever fave for the gallows humor, first in, last out, gritty Marine Corps trope. Quite like that. So, yeah.
Right. From Timmy Tam 13.
You sure it's not Timmy Tam B?
It could be B.
1-3 is kind of a B, right? Timmy Tam.
Yep.
I don't know.
There's a very, very good Mitch Hedberg joke around that I want to quote, but
yeah,
I'm not going to do it justice right now. Timmy Tam 13 is how it's written, but pretty sure I cried when Dobby sacrifices himself in Deathly Hallows. I don't know if it's my favorite example, but for some reason it really hit home.
PJ just became informed that Dobby dies in Harry Potter.
Yep.
Oh man, that's hysterical because of your experience with Harry Potter. That's great. Great answer. I think it's more than reasonable. So Summit in answer here. Mine are from Faithful in the Fallen by John Gwynne, both Gar and McQuinn, and won't spoil anything by saying anything more. So it's a reasonable answer. Love it.
Yeah. Artificer from our Discord. Best martyr is EO. Without her, we do not have the Red Rising series. And that's pretty true. That's pretty true. EO is like the source of that entire fucking story.
The impetus for it all. So,
yep.
Yeah. Agreed. From Marcus, we have Bruce Willis's character in Armageddon, sacrificing himself so his daughter and son-in-law could survive, and 5 years later make the movie Jersey Girl. Maybe he shouldn't have sacrificed himself. That was all, by the way, written by Marcus. That's a hysterical punchline. I love it. I hope I did it justice.
Another castle from our Discord and our good friend Adam. George in Halo Reach, which, good answer. I need to go back and replay all of the Halo series. I've been meaning to go back and like play it front to back.
God, we talked about it with Hart again. We're talking about that interview a lot here, but like we talked about it with Rob Hart, and I got like the tingly feelings of like, fuck, I should go back and play Halo.
Exactly,
which was a good time. So, PJ, what's yours?
Oh, all right, I'll go with mine.
Go.
Gandalf the Grey going and sacrificing himself to the Balrog, so the Fellowship can escape. Clear, like obviously he doesn't perish, or Gandalf the Grey perishes, but is reincarnated as Gandalf the White.
Okay,
but I think that is, I don't know. I think that fits, right?
Yeah, I think so.
What about you?
That's a good answer. I'm not. I have a different pick, but I'm not going to expose it because it exposes one of my favorite moments in a series that we will eventually read to some capacity.
Do you want me to? Take off my headphones.
I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not even going to put it in here because people who also haven't read it, I don't want to spoil it for them. However, I will instead talk about my favorite movie, which is Looper, of which ends with a moment of sacrifice, a martyr, to close the loop on a very different story that created a gangster villain that caused the entire story in front of us. And I think that it is the climax and sacrifice that solves a time loop problem that will eventually exist based on a dead mother. And I think that it is just so well done and so well written that the whole story is paid off in that singular moment in which Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character flips around the shotgun and takes himself out to kill his future self, who will cause nearly the apocalypse.
Such a good movie.
It's so fucking good. Yeah. So that's it for this week's question. For next week, we aren't exactly going to have a regular question. We might address this kind of at the end of the episode or in something bonus, but we'd like to know what you think about Mistborn, The Final Empire. Send us in your thoughts on this first book and kind of your feelings. If we get enough, we'll chat about it. Otherwise, maybe we won't. But we'd love to know. We'll address this in some capacity come either the next episode or the episode after that. So with that, next week is our wrap-up with our dear friend, Lindsay Lundeen. Lindsay has a fresh perspective that I'm really excited to bring onto the show. You guys asked for us to bring another one of our friends on. So here we are, bringing a friend on who is also an incredibly well-read reader, brilliant person, soon-to-be lawyer. Incredible person to have on the show.
Absolutely. I'm super excited for this. Really looking forward to it. It's always a fun time talking to Lindsay about anything. So,
yeah. To PJ's point too, earlier, she is kind of dominating our show next week. So she is also on the Romance Council episode that we're going to be putting out on February 14th on Valentine's Day. So she is a big part of that panel and will likely be, I guess I recorded tomorrow, so I can't really speak to the future, but is going to be kind of my co-host replacing you, PJ, for that episode. I'm going to be kind of co-chairing it. I'm going to kick it off.
Replacing me.
Temporary filling the seat. You understand what I mean.
I do.
That's kind of the game plan. So, yeah, so that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, as every week, to Tim and Andrew for helping us keep our show's lights on. Check out all of our links in the show notes. You can find our schedule, Patreon, previous episodes, our websites, all of our socials, all in one very convenient location.
Yeah, and we also want to take a second today to thank our new patrons, Bartender Wind Punter on Instagram. Make sure that you follow Wind Punter on Instagram. Fantastic Cosmere puns abound and memes and hysterical. Highly recommended if you're kind of absorbed into the same space as we are currently. But thank you, Wind Punter, for being our new barback, our new bartender, and as well to our new barback, Tim Andrews. Thanks a million for supporting the show, friends. I said Tim Andrews. Timmy Tam B or 13. I'm going to add that back. B. Timmy Tam B. Tim, that's why I decided to use your name that way, by the way, in case you're wondering about that direct message last night. So thank you for clarifying and letting me make this joke.
If you are looking for our social media accounts, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit at Words Whiskey Pod. That's whiskey with an E. And if you'd like to email us, we are wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com. And if you'd like to join our Patreon, that is patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey.
Yeah, we do a Devil's Cut of each episode, which is the little bonus segment that we tag onto the front, discussing a kind of question of the week, an icebreaker that's submitted by our patrons. That's at the entry-level tier, and beyond that, we have additional show bonuses, live shows, and even you can sponsor an episode of our podcast now, which is friggin' wild.
Super
Very
fun.
excited for. I'm excited for the first person who pulls that trigger. Like, I want to know what they want us to talk about. You know, like
Me too.
I'm curious. I'm curious. Cool. All right. With that, we'll see you next week with Lindsay Lundeen.
Great. That'll be fun.